Welcome, Crystal Warriors, to the Crystarium Net's Top 10 Super Nintendo RPGs. The NES list did pretty well, so I'm going to do it again. This list was much harder to make, by far, compared to the NES list. So, warning. This list is my list. The system has a treasure trove of games that deserve to be on this list. I do acknowledge that. So you may be shocked or outraged that many obvious classic standards don't appear here. Whether or not any particular game made it to the list does not necessarily reflect the quality of the game at all. Several features are taken into account while creating this list, such as critical reception, sales figures, general agreement of fans, but most of it is influenced by my personal feelings on these games. So let's get right on into it.
Number 10, Breath of Fire 2.
The follow-up to the popular Breath of Fire game that originally released on the Super Nintendo, this is one of Capcom's very few forays into the genre. Like many other RPGs, I personally came into the franchise a little bit later in its life with Breath of Fire 3 on the PlayStation. Unlike the later entries to the series, this game is actually a direct sequel to the initial installment. The series revolves around the main character named Ryu and his friends. And by the way, did they really need to use Ryu? I mean, come on, it's Capcom. Ryu is Street Fighter 2. But anyway, the twist on the franchise is that Ryu has the ability to transform into various types of dragons, which is really cool. The story is par for the course for your typical fantasy RPG. Again though, this is the one that's linked directly to the original. While you don't necessarily need to play the first one, you will get more out of the story if you do. Either way, you can play this on the Super Nintendo or get the Game Boy Advance remake. I highly recommend it.
Number 9, Star Ocean.
This is a Japan-only release that was developed by Tri-Ace. My experience with the game actually begins with Star Ocean's second story on the original PlayStation. As you might imagine, the franchise has a large sci-fi influence. However, the game will definitely evoke feelings of similar fantasy RPGs that came around this era. The battle system is actually very dynamic compared to the heavy hitters like Final Fantasy. Like most RPGs of this particular generation, the music is absolutely superb, as are the graphics. The story is serviceable enough, not exactly groundbreaking, but there are some good moments, combining what you might expect from a traditional fantasy game tossed in with the science fiction elements. It's one of the best science fantasy series out there. You may be able to find a fan-translated version floating out there somewhere, or you can pick up the PSP remake, which is available here in the USA.
Number 8, Terranigma.
Once again, this game was actually never released in the USA. However, it was located in the PAL regions and fully translated. Initially, the game is going to remind you of action RPGs of this era, specifically something maybe like Secret of Mana. However, the game is not part of Square. Square did not develop this. Shocker, I know. So it does have its own distinct feeling. The game's narrative is about saving Earth, and by that, I quite literally mean the world that we live on. Of course, this is a fictionalized version of our world, steeped in magic, alternate dimensions, and things like that. I am a sucker for games that reference the geography of our world in those games, and this game made that a great approach. This game is probably the most well-known game that actually no one mentions of ever playing. Check it out if you can.
Number 7, Tales of Fantasia.
Ah, the Tales games, one of the most obscure series of the time, and since then it has grown to rival the giant franchises of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, but it all started here. I seem to have a habit of picking games that weren't released in the USA, but such is the way of my top 10. The game was eventually released here in the US on the Game Boy Advance. The game sports some superb graphics, some of the best you're actually ever going to find on this system. If you played the other Tales games, you're going to immediately recognize the genesis of the battle system that was in this game. For those of you unfamiliar, it's kind of like a hybrid between your traditional side view Final Fantasy battles. However, you can only control one character in your party, and you have a more direct real-time control over him. Again, the story isn't groundbreaking, but it is a solid Ancient Evil plot. The real treat here is the graphics and the battle system, which are superb.
Number 6, Harvest Moon.
A bit of a different game appearing here. Harvest Moon was developed by Natsume and has spawned a long-running series known as the Harvest Moon franchise, as well as a few spin-offs like Rune Factory and Innocent Life. The series franchise as of 2014 though has been renamed to Story of Seasons. That was actually a new thing I discovered when I was researching this. The game takes a laid-back approach for the more social aspect of role-playing games. Here's the first in a long line of farming simulators. Whenever I heard people speak of this game, it sounded boring. it sounded stupid. Then I watched people play it, and again, I didn't get it at all. But whenever I had the chance to play it myself, it became completely apparent to me. This is a game where you raise animals, grow crops, gain money, marry a spouse, and have children. The game actually ends after 2.5 in-game years of playing, and you get scored on how well you live. This is a very chill game. It's a great play when you just want to wind down from a hard day. I don't expect the footage that you're watching right now to wow you, or my synopsis to make you jump out of the seat and want to play the game. Regardless, I recommend that you experience the game for yourself and see what all the fuss is about.
Number 5, Live Alive.
This game evaded me for a very long time until a few years ago when I decided to play it, and I freaking love this game. This game was developed by Square and once again never released in America. The game is completely unique to most RPGs of the era. The game story is divided up into several smaller stories, eventually all of which culminate into, well, I'm not going to talk about it here. Each story has a completely different theme and time period. You can expect genres spanning from prehistoric times to ancient China and Japan, westerns, modern day, and futuristic sort of mecha plots. It's a crime that this game didn't make it over here in the States. The battle system is a little more tactical based than other games that you would have seen from Square at the time, like Final Fantasy. I was pleasantly surprised when I played it, and if you can find a translated version, I highly recommend giving this one a go. It's probably the best game you've never heard of.
Number 4, Secret of Mana.
Secret of Mana was developed again by Squaresoft, and this game was also known as Seiken Densetsu 2 in Japan. It's one of the most highly praised Super Nintendo games of all time. If you have even a moderate interest in the SNES, I'll bet you have at least heard of this game, whether you like role-playing games or not. The game is second in the series of the initially fantastic Mana games, with the original actually being released on the Game Boy under the name of Final Fantasy Adventure. The game sports a semi-real-time battle system. To do any significant damage though, you must wait a few seconds for your weapon to charge after attacking. The game boasts a fantastic storyline with top-tier music to match. What's even better is that 2 other friends can actually play co-op, assuming you have the SNES multi-adapter. The game was really the world's introduction to the Mana series, and what an impression it made. If you haven't played this game, you absolutely need to put it on your list. You will not regret it.
Number 3, Final Fantasy 3/6.
This game. Oh, this game. To the surprise of many, this was actually not going to appear on the list at all. It was a conscious effort on my part to not overload this list with Final Fantasy titles. So I'll say it now. Final Fantasy 2/4 and 5 easily could have taken this place. So why is this one on my list? Originally, the game was developed by Squaresoft, and this is what I consider the nexus of the Final Fantasy games, which bridged the gap between the classic series that came before, and it's paving the way for the new modern high-tech series that would come after. This game is very, very special for a few reasons. First, there is no main character. The story is masterfully woven through different viewpoints of our protagonists, shifting as the narrative progresses. Speaking of which, something happens near the middle of the game that's going to blow you away if you've never played it. The music is some of the most memorable in the entire series. The battle system features the active time battle system that originally appeared in Final Fantasy IV. There are 2 extremely important aspects of this game though that really set it apart from the previous ones. One of which is that it has a heavy focus on summons, or eidolons, or aeons, or whatever you want to call them. But these summons though will appear prominently in most, if not all, of the future Final Fantasy games, generally as a central point of narrative. The other aspect is melding of magic and technology known as Magitech, which again will be featured heavily in the series going forward. It's a huge step that evolves the franchise, and they pulled it off masterfully. It is a fairly long game, but worth every second spent. If you want to play it just for the love of God, do not play the iOS PC quote-unquote remasters.
Number 2, A Link to the Past.
This game defined my childhood. Pure and simple. I must stress, it probably belongs on the number 1 slot of this list. It was agony to put it at number 2. Regardless, this game is a masterpiece. Easily a 10 out of 10 if you're into that sort of number rating system. A Link to the Past was the 3rd in the Zelda series and went back to the overhead top-down view that was introduced in the original Legend of Zelda. However, this game is what the original game was, but turned up to 11. I freely admit nostalgia blindness may apply here. There's very, very little I can say that is wrong with the game. The pacing, music, control, narrative, all of them are on point. This is a must-play, period. This is where the Zelda franchise, as we know it today, really began. You have the 3 jewels, you have the Master Sword, you have the 8 dungeons sprinkled in with exploration and secrets. It's the iconic Zelda formula, and it's been fully realized in this game. To say the game influenced the industry would be a vast understatement. It would become the defining game of which most action-adventure RPGs now emulate, even to this day. If you have not played this game, why are you even still here? Go play it now. Seriously.
Number 1, Chrono Trigger.
Here it sits. It's the king of Super Nintendo RPGs. This is hands down the most definitive RPG on the SNES and possibly console RPGs in general. If there were an objective 10 out of 10 game on this list, this game would be bestowed that rating. Chrono Trigger was developed again by Square and it released in March of 1995. Alright, let's start. We have the art. The graphics were created by Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball fame, as well as the Dragon Quest series. Everything is superbly detailed with fantastic special effects for the attacks and spells, etc. The battle system is hands down my favorite battle system on the Super Nintendo, and it makes a strong case for the best battle system ever. Initially it may look similar to a Final Fantasy game, but upon actually playing, the uniqueness immediately presents itself. So you have 3 people to a team, and each character is unique. And furthermore, there are abilities called dual and triple text that combine with other characters for a much more powerful attack. These aren't random at all. These are not generic. Each of these depends entirely on which characters are in the party at the time. Battles also do not transition into a battle screen like Final Fantasy. All battles are fought on the same map where you're running around. These enemies can be seen and thus actually can be avoided. The music was composed primarily by Yasunori Mitsuda with the help of Nobuo Uematsu, the main composer of the Final Fantasy series. The music of the Chrono series in general is the best in the industry. The story, oh my god, the story. The story follows a group of adventurers that are time traveling trying to stop an ancient threat, but you could argue that it follows the ancient evil storyline that actually wouldn't be accurate, and I don't want to spoil it here why that isn't accurate. The game has perfect pacing. Everything in the game has a purpose. There's no superfluous filler bullshit about it. The game can be completed in around, 15 hours or so, but you can spend hundreds on it easily if you so wish. They have chiseled away the stone block of RPG to a perfect structure here. The game has multiple mind-blowing twists that create a fantastically deep narrative. Along the same lines, this game actually has several different endings depending on how and when you complete the game. In fact, you can go to the main boss extremely early in the game, which is just crazy. I could go on and on, so I'll save it for a proper review. I'll end on this though. If you were to only play one RPG from this era, make that this game. Hell, if you could only play one RPG in general, this is the game you need to play. The game has been released a few times afterwards on PlayStation 1 and DS. If you really want to play it, get your hands on the DS release. It is the definitive version. So there are a plethora of SNES RPGs that deserve to be on this list. With that being said, sometime in the future, I'll probably make another top 10 SNES RPGs. There are just too many to let go. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit that subscribe button and the like buttons, along with the share maybe. Alright, Crystal Warriors, until next time, keep on gaming.